Thank you. It is an honor to be a recipient of the 2020 Empowerment Achievement Award. I've been really inspired to be a part of the Mint journey from the beginning, and to have this honor means a lot to me. I think that it's so important to build structures that support one another. I think it's especially important that people of color support other people of color. I think it's especially important that Black people support other Black people. And I think that that Mint Magazine embodies these tenets, and I'm thankful to be a part of that story. I think that for me, for my own journey of leadership, I have had to learn the tension between stepping forward and falling back, and I think that both of those things are incredibly important. I think that that as a man, as a cisgendered, able-bodied, masculine, light-skinned male, my journey of leadership really has been about learning when it's okay to step away from the spotlight, when it's okay to support from behind the scenes. And I think that as a Black person, as a person of color, as a Jew, as a person that doesn't come from a rich family, I also had to learn when it was important to step forward, to step into my power, and to claim that moment. And I think that for many of us who hold conflicting identities, who hold identities of privilege and identities of oppression simultaneously, learning how to lead through that means balancing that tension between stepping forward and stepping back. And I'm really thankful to be in the company of other leaders who look at that tension, look at it in the eye, and challenge it and hold it and choose to live in it. So thank you again for this year's award, and I'm excited to see what Mint Magazine continues to do moving forward.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Empowerment 2020 conference. My name is Josh Foster, Mint co-founder and CEO.
And my name is Sherron Pearson, Mint co-founder and CTO. Welcome to today's conference and today's panel. Today, we're honoring our 2020 Empowerment Achievement Award honoree, Aaron Samuels. This award was created to honor a young minority professional who exemplifies proven commitment to empowering the voices of communities and showing a consistent level of excellence in their field. Aaron, obviously you exceed this criteria, and we're so thrilled to have you here.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. And we want to dive right into it, get as much of your voice in this as possible. So if you could start off giving a brief introduction about yourself and who you are.
Thank you so much for having me, Josh, Sherron. And I guess before I get started, I also just wanted to say that I appreciate everything that you're building with Mint Magazine. It was an honor to be a part of it in one of the first issues, and it's been really amazing to watch it grow. I think it's super important to highlight the accomplishments, achievements, and the glow up of people of color working in professional spaces. So, just really stand for everything that you're building. And then me, I'm Aaron Samuels, co-founder and chief operating officer of Blavity Incorporated, an LA-based media publication. We make content, build community for Black millennials, and I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you for that. And thank you for mentioning your past participation with Mint and Mint Mag. We're 100% grateful for the support you've given us throughout our journey. Where did the roots of your passion to develop a Black millennial community begin?
Yeah, it's a great question. And with all origin stories, you don't necessarily experience them at the time. A lot of times we look retrospectively and connect dots and draw narratives. But of course, for me, it begins with my family, and with my childhood. I grew up in a mixed race, mixed faith household in Providence, Rhode Island. Black and Jewish. My dad, African American and Jamaican. My mom, kind of Russian, Polish origin, Ashkenazi Jews. And both of my parents kind of being, a few generations removed from being immigrants, but still kind of having that otherness in our blood, in our intergenerational trauma. Raised me to always question the world around me, to always challenge the rules that seemed to be designed to oppress as opposed to support, to marginalize as opposed to include. And growing up kind of part of two minority cultures, and being mixed race kind of within that, oftentimes made me aware of this concept of otherness, and what that can feel like. And I think that for me, a lot of my orientation toward inclusivity and toward building communities of support stemmed from early experiences of feeling excluded, and feeling that lack of support, and saying, we can do it better. I would also say that where I also learned love, and where I learned acceptance was as a part of these communities. From an early age, my parents, it was really important to them that I felt very firmly a part of the Black community, and very firmly a part of the Jewish community, where we were growing up, and in Rhode Island. And so, so in many ways, juxtaposed against this world that felt perhaps exclusive at times, or felt like there were rules that were designed to prevent the success of people that looked like me, or came from backgrounds that I came from. I had this alternative as well, which is this feeling of love, of community, of family, in the way that we can bring each other up. So early on, I felt that, and I experienced it, which is just, as I think, one of the reasons that then, as an adult, me alongside, with my co-founders, Morgan and Jeff and Jonathan, started asking ourselves, what does that same type of community support look like in the digital world? What does it look like if we apply, the lessons that we've learned, since the beginning of time, but especially over the past 400 years in this country, of the ways that our communities can support each other? What happens when we add mobile first technology? What happens when we add the digital component? What happens when we add social media to all of these traditions that we already had, to build a digital ecosystem, a digital network fabric of support for our communities? And so I think that's kind of where it came from.
Did anything propel you to have that conversation with your co-founders, or was it more of a casual thing? Are you all friends and you guys were having a discussion, hey, what would be cool? Or did something trigger this discussion, or did something highlight the need for community for you all?
That's a good question.
Yeah. I mean, there were many things. So a few aspects of that question I'll tease out. So one, all four of us were friends. We all went to college together at Washington University in St. Louis. So there was already such a strong amount of trust and camaraderie. By the time we started Blavity, we'd all been a few years out of college, but we'd had this backbone that we could lean on. Morgan, Jeff, and I are all part of the same scholarship program, which was a scholarship program to promote Black leadership, called the Urban Scholars Program at Washington University in St. Louis. Morgan, Jonathan, and I were all part of the same community service honor society, where we'd worked together. Morgan and Jeff had started a couple other companies together and had that working relationship experience. So there were a lot of commonalities between us, more than just friendship, definitely friendship, but also I'd say we had a deep stake in each other's success from a young age. So that was one part of it. The second part of it was that all of us all of us had graduated and then ended up in different parts of the corporate world. So we went from this experience at Washington University, which was a primarily white institution, but had a very, very strong Black community. Like at WashU, it was like the Black community, we just held each other down. It was amazing. And it was representative of a multitude and a multiplicity of Blackness, which was really important, you know, ranging from, you know, of course, you know, like African Americans from St. Louis, from Missouri, to, you know, mixed race, you know, Black and Jewish dudes from the Northeast like me, to, you know, Jeff, you know, grew up on the south side of Chicago and with a large family. Jonathan was the son of Trinidadian immigrants, you know, Afro-Latino, Afro-Caribbean, Africans, you know, first generation African. So, you know, there was this wide umbrella, this wide tent of the Black community, and we all had that love and support. So even though there weren't that many of us, there were days that we would joke. There were days that I could go and like only talk to Black people, because, like, you know, we'd be rolling together and we'd have these communities, which is amazing to have inside of a primarily white institution. And you know, we graduated, went off to corporate America, and suddenly it's a very different story. You know, I was working at Bain & Company in New York, and I was the only Black person hired in my start class of associates. You know, Morgan at Intuit, you know, Jonathan at LinkedIn, Jeff at Palantir, similar stories where, you know, not only are we now in a primarily white institution, but we didn't feel that we had that same connection to our community that we were able to have as undergrads. So, but the good thing about it is we had that memory though, right? We knew what it could feel like. And so then, you know, we started asking ourselves, okay, like, is there a way that we can replicate that somehow? So maybe we're not going to get that from our Black Employee Resource Group. Although, you know, a lot of companies are starting to make progress on that vein, but, you know, at the time it's like, maybe we're not going to get that. Maybe there's not enough Black people here to even create a Black Employee Resource Group. But what does it look like if you go to a website, if you go to an app, and suddenly you're transported back to that feeling? You're transported back to that feeling of community, of love. And so that was the question we were already asking ourselves as we were building this up. And then, you know, 2013, 2014 came around, which was just a very critical time in this country's development. We saw the origins of Black Lives Matter. You know, we saw the government execution of Troy Davis in 2012. We saw the murder of Trayvon Martin in 2013. And then that was all boiling up to the murder of Mike Brown in Ferguson in 2014. And these were deaths that, you know, of course, all life lost is a tragedy, and all Black lives lost are especially a tragedy. But these particular instances just really were hitting home for Black millennials in a hard way. Now, you know, being Black in this country, you grow up and, you know, you're constantly inundated with images of police brutality and violence. And so it wasn't that it was a truth that we were unfamiliar with, but it was more feeling like, you know, back in, you know, 2013, 2014, for the first time, it was starting to really get media attention in a wide way. But we didn't feel like that the media was telling the stories accurately. We were either seeing stories not being covered at all, or, you know, being misrepresented, or perverted to serve different agendas. And, you know, we started asking ourselves, okay, well, who are specifically the Black millennials that are covering these stories, and how are we having these conversations? And we didn't really have a lot of major outlets, but it wasn't that we weren't talking about these things though, and that was the thing that we kept pushing ourselves on. Because if you were asking, you know, Black millennials back in 2014, like, how are you getting your news? How are you getting your information? Are you paying attention? Are you civically engaged? Most people would say, yeah, I'm absolutely engaged. Yeah. Cool. Are you watching CNN? No. Are you watching NBC? No. Are you reading the New York Times? Often not. So how are you getting your news? And we found a really interesting through line, because it's not that we weren't paying attention. It's that we were getting our news from Twitter. We were getting our news from WhatsApp groups. We were getting our news from Slack communities. We were getting our news from direct messaging articles between each other, from Instagram threads. And then suddenly we're realizing, oh, wow, like the way that news is traveling is different for millennials. Not just in the way that content is sourced, but also in the way that content needs to be pushed out. And there wasn't a Black media company at the time that in our opinion was really looking at news that way, not just saying how can we tell stories authentically from a Black perspective, but how do we use the tools and the mechanisms of millennial communication, and now leading into Gen Z communication, to both source and distribute that content. So that was all happening, you know, in that moment, the confluence of the critical moment in our nation, the beginning of the uprising for Black lives in my generation, and this change in technology and what was technologically available for us to communicate with each other. And I remember, you know, Morgan called each of us and you know, sat down and set time with each of us and was basically like, are you seeing what I'm seeing? And each of us were like, yeah, we'd come to these conclusions through our own paths. And Morgan was like, we got to create a Black media company. It's time. And then she brought us all together. She kind of brought the band back together and said, let's do this. And so that was, in 2014, we began the conversation in 2013. We launched in July of 2014. And so now 6 years later, Blavity has become what it is today.
That's amazing. It's amazing. It's great. I feel like what kind of drove through all of that with each of your experiences, with the experience happening in the world, is how you leverage what was there to be able to create what's happening right now in the community that Blavity is. And I think that's a really key point to know when and where you can leverage what's there to make something better. And kind of honing in a little bit more into your own personal experiences. You were saying that you're from Providence in the Northeast, Black and Jewish family. You spent time at Bain. You spent time in a lot of different places where I'm sure each place has made a part of who you are and what you're doing today. So how have you leveraged your own personal experiences to help your current role right now and where you are?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I guess I'll start by saying that I think that one of the tools of white supremacy that is used to oppress people of color is this notion that we are alone, that we are isolated, and I think that isolation is a tactic. It's a tool designed to prevent people of color from reaching for what they know that they can achieve. And so I believe that the way that you combat isolation is community, right? Community is the tool to fight against that. And so one of the things that I attribute to my success is that in each of the instances that I had to navigate situations where somebody might have made me feel alone, I've been very fortunate to have mentors, to have friends who've reached out to me at critical moments to say, you're not alone. I went through what you went through. You know, I'm a Black person that went through Bain 5 years before you did, and like, let me tell you how I navigated it. I'm a person of color in this environment who's raising funds for a company. Like, let me tell you how I did that. You know, I'm a Black poet, I'm a Black content creator, I'm another Black and Jewish person that's navigated the corporate setting as a mixed race Black and Jewish person. Let me help you. And I've had people that have fit all those modes along the way. And so, you know, that's step one, is to say that a lot of my success, you know, sure, I'm a hard worker, I'm a smart dude, all that. But I've also very, very much had people along the way reach out to me to over communicate the message. No, Aaron, you're not alone. And we got you. And it's something that I hold on to pretty clearly in the way that I try to lead as I move forward, is to remember that that simple thing, to reach out to somebody else and say, hey, this pain that you're experiencing, I too experienced that at one point in time, and I made it through. Let me tell you the tools that I used. Let me show you the methods that I did, or let me just simply show you that it can be done. That can be a very powerful thing, and I know because it was powerful when I experienced it, when people were reaching out to me. So I know that doesn't directly answer your question, but for me, like that's one of the core tenets that has kind of helped me along this journey to where I am today.
That's good, yeah.
Oh yeah, perfect. And just to piggyback on something that you mentioned or touched on was that you are a Black poet. And I'm curious to know, and I think our audience members could benefit from hearing how you utilize poetry to inform your role at Blavity or to become a better storyteller. How do you integrate poetry into your role and your life?
Yeah, and poetry is one of my first loves. I've been writing pretty actively since I was 14. And that was another community that held me a lot as I was coming into my young adult self. I was lucky to be part of the Providence Poetry Slam team as a youth, competed nationally, had the opportunity at age 15 to travel to a conference called Brave New Voices, where I met a whole bunch of other 15, 16-year-olds who all identified as poets. And I was like, oh, you can identify as a poet as a 15-year-old? Like you can just say I'm a poet and be a poet? It was a wild experience. And most of the folks, there that were rocking were, other people of color who were writing poetry to talk about, their families and their identities and what they were going through. And I just thought it was a beautiful thing. And it's really kind of carried me through. I think with storytelling, I think I learned really two things, both as a writer and then as I got a little older, started teaching, started doing writing workshops, and saw two things, which is one, when you tell your own story, it can change the way that other people see you. And I think that maybe even more importantly, number two, is that when you tell your own story and you really have full ownership and mastery over your own narrative, it changes the way that you see yourself. And that's power. I wasn't familiar with this word when I was 14, but as I got older, I learned about the makings of self-efficacy, right? This notion of being able to charter your own destiny. And I think that that starts with storytelling. And in many ways, one of the projects that I've had, with Blavity is this notion of how do you scale that? How do you scale the power of storytelling for a community and for, specifically with Blavity for the Black community? So I think it impacts everything. What I'll say specifically about this day and age is poetry. So my dad is probably the first person that gave me a definition of poetry. There are lots of definitions of poetry, but my dad would say poetry is the shortest short story. Right? That's what when I was growing up, that's what my dad would say. It's not the only definition of poetry, and I definitely got some other good ones, but that's my dad's definition of poetry, right? The shortest short story. And I would think about that a lot when I was learning tools in poetry like economy of language and brevity, which of course are not traits that all poems use, but it's a part of the poetic journey for sure. And for me, when I'm asking myself, okay, then what is really happening in a poem, in that short story, the way that I reframed that definition is that it was a mechanism that in a brief moment can transfer an emotion from a writer to a reader, or from a speaker to a listener. It's a vehicle. It's a transfer mechanism of an emotion. And I was asking myself, okay, what else fits that description that can quickly transfer an emotion from a creator to a recipient? And that's a tweet. That's an Instagram post. Yeah. That's a meme, right? That's a GIF, right? So I'm like, oh, okay, cool. There's something happening that is very similar to the tools and mechanisms of poetry that I grew up being educated with. That's happening across the entire techno system that we live in right now. And so when I think about, okay, what does it look like to make a new media company, a media company of the future, I think a lot of times people are like, okay, how do I translate journalism to the present, right? What does it look like to take what the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal did and then enter that into the digital space? And while there's definitely things to learn from that, I think that one of the advantages that we had at Blavity was we were also asking ourselves a different question, which is what does it look like to pull from poetry, right? To pull from these short mechanisms that can transfer an emotion very fast, because that also very, very well translates to memes and GIFs and tweets and IG posts. And look, you know, there's lots of disagreement about it. You know, is Instagram good for the human psyche, right? Is this good for the world? You know, we're doom scrolling every night and crying ourselves to sleep. And, you know, there's definitely some negatives. But I think there's no contest that Instagram culture, TikTok culture, Twitter culture changed the way that information is being distributed. But you can argue whether it's good or bad, but it's definitely changed. And we need to recognize that. And I think it's the tools from the discipline of poetry that are really helpful to be able to spread messages through these new technological mechanisms.
Way to bring that full circle. If you could fast forward 30 years from today, what type of legacy would you like to look back on?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I hope that 30 years from today, I'm still building something. So that's one. I don't know that I'm done yet. I'm only 31 right now, so I got some energy in me still. Don't let the beard age me. I got some energy left. But if I could say, okay, living legacy, right? Fingers crossed. I'm still alive at this point. I want to see a whole lot more Blavities, right? I want to see a whole lot more media companies, a whole lot more Black-owned companies, companies that have women CEOs and strong women in leadership positions. I want to see more versions of this. I think one of the remarkable things about Blavity actually isn't that remarkable. It's like what's remarkable is that, you know, we created this Black media company with 4 Black founders, a woman CEO in 2014, and I think that's remarkable because there were not that many companies like that in the world. But that second part is actually the part that we should be looking at as remarkable in a bad way. Like it's remarkable and astonishing that there are not more companies like this. Because it's not because the talent isn't there. It's not because we don't have brilliant people in the Black community that are ready to build and ready to create amazing things. That's not why. You know, I don't need to tell y'all this. But you know, I think the reason why is because there are structural inequalities and barriers that are put in place that prevent Black people who are more than capable of creating amazing things. It prevents them from being able to go for it. What I want to do is 2 things, which is 1, build more companies like this and continue to build up Blavity as an example of how it's possible. And then 2, learn as much as possible and be as loud and as vocal as possible about the learnings, so that as many people can do things like this. And you know, for all the dope, amazing Black-owned companies that are already out here, our goal is to loudly support one another. To big up each other. Again, you know, I said this at the beginning of the interview, but yeah, I mean, stronger together. I think that community is the way that we combat isolation. And I hate articles that come out as, you know, this Black company is the only Black company to blank, the only Black company to blank. And, you know, while it's important to shout out, you know, each other, I way more love the articles that are like, look at these 100 Black-owned companies in your area that you probably weren't even checking for. Or look at these 100 Black people that have done this over a different point of time. Right? I think we need to remember that that we lose when we take a Black exceptionalism approach to things. Like what we need to remember is that there's brilliance embedded in the fabric of our identity, in the fabric of our community. So 30 years from now, what I would hope is that message is the thing that can be perpetuated. It's not a singular version of success. It's a holistic community version of success that ends up being perpetuated.
Ooh, I don't know about you, Sherron, but that kind of fired me up. That was good. I felt like you were taking me to church there with that answer. Love it.
Excellent. It was truly excellent. And I know that our audience will benefit from this. And I truthfully wish it were longer so that we can get more gems and jewels from that noggin of yours. But truthfully, valuable information and things that need to be highlighted and communicated more. Just even to people wanting to begin their entrepreneurial journey is knowing that, hey, I can do this too. You know what I mean? And there's something in that message that is inspiring in itself. So thank you so much for not only rising and utilizing your skills to, and your co-founders, of course, to begin this company, but also understanding the responsibility, or not even responsibility, but you're taking this on yourself to bring as many companies up, Mint included, thank you for that, as many companies up with you. And that's truthfully what we preach at Mint. And we're just so thankful that you were here to also echo those thoughts.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yes. Are there any final closing thoughts that you have? If there's any last gems you want to give, we definitely want to continue to amplify your voice and what it is that you have to say.
We all have.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know if I'm going to say anything brilliant, but I will say a couple expressions of gratitude. So one, grateful to Mint and to what you're doing. I think that you're really embodying the work that needs to happen here. When I was first approached, Joshua, by you about Mint, the concept that resonated with me was we want to create a magazine that highlights and promotes amazing people of color. Like that was the essence of the work, is like, by celebrating each other we will win. And I was like, yes, that is exactly what should happen. I love that tenet, and so I love the example that you're leading through. I think it's so important that by building each other up as opposed to taking each other down, we can all win collectively. So one, I just want to say thank you for doing that work, and thank you for kind of inviting me to be a part of that story. I appreciate that. And then also said to you, and also to the other entrepreneurs listening, recognizing that sometimes doing that work is not an easy thing. And so, I know this from my own experience, and every entrepreneur knows this, that in order to get to that final product, this conference, these videos, these outputs, there are so many obstacles that you have to jump over or barrel through or kind of dodge on the way, on the journey. I think a lot of Black people, we make it look easy, or we don't want to discuss the pain that we had to overcome in order to get to these moments. So also expressing gratitude for that, for all the obstacles and all the hurdles that likely had to be jumped over in order to even get to this moment, energy and positivity as we move forward, because there will likely be more obstacles as we continue.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you very much again, for your time, for your wisdom, and for the continued work that you're doing. And thank everyone for joining us for this amazing moderated discussion that we had with Aaron in the EmpowerMint 2020 conference.
Thank you for joining us, Aaron, and thank you again to all of the viewers watching.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.